think I'm going to sit right here so I can check on things and whatnot, but solid. Okay. Alrighty, so I guess a good place to start would be here, Mount Pleasant, where you grew up. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, my great-grandparents came from Sweden, and my great-great-grandmother, Elna Nielsdottir, traveled with a group of Mormon missionaries and Mormon converts that were coming to an area in Nebraska near Omaha, and she proceeded from there to prepare to come west, and that was in 1856, I believe it was, 57. And she was one of those pioneers that walked majority of the way. There were no trains at that time. So it was a heritage that I didn't appreciate until I got much older. And I remember hearing my father say multiple times, "DeeAnn, remember, you have nothing to complain about."
Yeah.
Your great-grandmother walked all the way from there to Salt Lake City, and then was sent to the little town of Moroni, Utah, where she was given a husband, I think is how we would put it, and had several children. One of the babies died and is buried in the Mount Pleasant Cemetery. And she married Albert Edward Peterson. Unfortunately, the marriage did not hold, or he went off to explore new and better things and left her with many children. So I have a tough shell, I guess you would say. And maybe because my mother came from the same type of environment, except later. Her parents came in the late 1890s, early 1900s. The father came first, Leonardo Pagano, from Ossoro de Puglia, Italy. And to make a long story short, they actually got to Utah, where he worked in the mines, the coal mines over in Carbon County, and where there was imminent war at one point between the miners and the owners and the government. And my grandfather decided that he had to protect his family and left because he wanted to work above ground, and he had been given that job and that's what he was doing. But there was always this contention. And the story goes is that my mother, her mother, was pregnant with her. And they got out in an area between Price, Utah, and near the Crystal River in Picton County, Colorado. And my grandmother said, "By the way, you'll need to stop." And it was in March. My mother was born in March of 1904, and she was giving birth to my mother. It happened to be in a sheltered type of a cave where she was actually born. So I have very tough survival skills.
Sure.
I think that's the way you would put it, is tough survival. And yet you look at people, and they all have tough times. Everybody has a story to tell about how they learn to appreciate their families, people who were instrumental in their lives. And so I come from two sides of that. And then the question always is asked is, was I a Mormon? Yes, my grandmother from Sweden was a converted Mormon, and yet their lives were so different than what we live now. I was not baptized until I was 17, just graduating from high school. And my mother said, "I just can't let you leave home until you've been baptized." And so there was some conversion there, and yet I've never regretted that decision in my life. Here in Mount Pleasant, it has been a Swedish-Danish community for as long as I can remember. I graduated from high school in 1957. Went
Just down the road?
Well, not that school, that's a newer school. I went to a much older school that has been destroyed. It just crumbled apart, it fell apart. The reason I was in Mount Pleasant is not because of my grandparents, it was in spite of them, that my mother met my father, and my father had been divorced and had a half sister that preceded me. My mother and father married in 1920. My mother was, well, that's not right. There's an issue there. I'd have to recheck the exact time. But it was a country life. We went to the Salt Lake twice a year, whether we needed to or not. My mother had been a teacher before she married, and she taught many, many years later. She basically taught 40 years. And her heritage being Italian, she spoke Italian, she spoke Spanish.
Wow.
She taught herself to play the piano, but she could outwork any person I knew. She just could do it, and that's why we still have this house. We've owned this house here in Mount Pleasant at 250 West Main Street. We've owned it since I was 7 years old, and I will soon be 78. So it has a long heritage. It's been a well-constructed house.
Yes. No kidding.
After I graduated from high school, like I said, I went to work at Zion National Park, and I got the job all by myself. I think that's one of those little accomplishments that you say,
Right.
well, don't be too proud of yourself. But my parents didn't know that I had gotten the job, and I was to report to work at the lodge in Washington County near Zion National Park the day after I graduated from high school. And I
Wasting no time.
Yeah. I remember very clearly getting in the car. My dad had bought a Chrysler, and that was the most expensive car he'd ever had. And we drove down to Zion. But before we left the driveway, he turned around and said, "Now, DeeAnn, I know you're excited about going, but remember, you agreed to go. I will not come and get you if you want to quit jobs." It was a very well-learned lesson, is that when you make commitments that you think are right initially, then you stick with it. And he had tears in his eyes and was crying, because I'm an only child. Even though I had a half-sister, she never lived with us. The experience in Zion it's just put DNA in my system. I've always loved Zion more so than any other place, special place, other than home or special places that you have in your life. The benefit of being in Zion, I met a young man who was quite a character, and he happened to be your grandfather, William Boyd Dover. And we were married September 22nd in 1962. I had been in Japan, and you and I have that connection, even though I don't believe you ever got to Nagano, as some people say, but Nagano to me. And I lived with a Japanese family who was northwest of Tokyo. And I went by train with a group of other graduates who were either in graduate school or were professional people, and I had taught a couple of years. So the experience was to be there. We went by ship, which was unheard of, but it took us 2 weeks on the SS Oronse. And we went from San Francisco to Long Beach to Honolulu, and then on to Yokohama Bay. Long before
Right.
Narita. Narita
Yes.
was not there. It was water. It was not filled in. It
Had to go to the
became-
port.
In fact, it was finished when we left from Narita, when we came home. It was a growing up experience, and yet it was one I treasured all my life. That I had the opportunity to live in another country, to try and understand another culture. We were well protected. We were, my mother said, "No, you're not going back to Japan, or Japan period." And I said, "Yeah, Mom, it's something I have to do." The summer before, I had gone to Europe, and I was there for basically 3 months. It was an interesting little tale. I met a man from Denmark at a travel show, and he said, "Well, if you can get more of your sorority sisters to go with us, then your fare will be free." So boy, did I work to make that that happen. And I did have, I believe it was 6 sorority sisters who went. And we the places we went and the exposure to cultures all over Europe. I mean, we went from England to France to Italy to Switzerland to on and through Sweden. And you can imagine how much I wanted to know my relatives, but I did not. I did not ever make the connection until much later in my life.
Right.
And I've often said, I've never wasted a penny on traveling. And people kind of look at you like, "What do you mean? Did you waste a penny on traveling?" And I said, "Absolutely not. I spent every penny I could to travel." That I communicate with German people. I communicate with my Italian family. I can communicate with my Swedish family and my Japanese students.
Right.
And my Chinese friends. My Japanese family. So I think that's, I've been really lucky.
Sure.
Been fun.
And you got to go a few years ago visit the sort of origins of
Yes.
both sides of your family in Italy and Sweden. You
Right.
dragged the boys with you, and
I remember
that was quite the experience.
Yeah, I remember thinking, maybe someday my daughter-in-laws will forgive me for not taking them. But it was a time in all of our lives that if I didn't go then, I probably wouldn't have been able to go.
Right.
It also was a time when families were still young enough, and I just had to kind of push it along, and Earl kept encouraging me. But we went to the homeland of Sweden and the actual places in Italy.
Looking through like the family records and everything too, right? I
Yes.
mean, yeah.
In Italy especially. But the cousin in Sweden has done all kinds of genealogy.
Oh.
Yeah. And that's wonderful because you're really connected with them. They're true cousins. I've been to Sweden 5-6 times at their invitation to come, and we've had family reunions there. I was looking for 4 names in Italy. Schiavone, Pagano. I'll remember the other 2 when we stop.
That's usually how it goes.
But those families are near and dear to me because my mother and father never got to those countries. They never knew the heritage that they had. And I feel so blessed that I was able to do that with my 3 sons.
Yeah.
And if nothing more, it planted a few seeds in their desire for your generation to know their heritage.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you are certainly the sort of master of the of the family. Yeah, maybe that's it.
I'm not sure.
But you're definitely the conscience of the family when it comes to the history and where we come from, and that's probably because of your experiences growing up or hearing about your grandparents, right? Sort
Right.
of inspiring you to
Well,
keep up with all that.
it is, when you come to a little town like this and you look at a house and you say, oh, my great-grandmother's brother built that home. Or you go to Wasatch Academy and you say, oh, my grandfather built that home. You know, it gives you a tie to your past and to an honorable past. They weren't perfect, none of us are, but an honorable past that they wanted the best for the next generation. And I've always known that. I've always known that my grandparents gave everything, including I guess I didn't put this in there, but my mother was born in 1904 here in Utah. But her mother died in childbirth when she was 8 years old. So that's a heartbreak for children when I saw the sorrow in my mother's life, that she never really had a mother. And yet I had a really good mother. And how she managed to learn to be a good mother didn't come from experience.
Right.
She just had the desire.
Yeah. When you were talking about Europe, what was your college experience like? You went to the U, right?
Yeah.
And how did you end up in, like, what predicated the Europe and the Japan trips, and what did you study? Kind of what was your college
Well, I'll put
experience?
it very simply. On my headstone, I have thought about what I would like. And I many times have jokingly, but quite seriously said, on my headstone, I will write, had passport, did travel. And I think I've lived up to that pretty well. I've been around the world. You know, there are not many people who can say that.
Yeah.
But graduating from high school, being a country bumpkin, basically, several of us who went on. I was in a sorority. I worked part-time. The hard part for me was my father died in November of school starting in the fall. And that was out of the blue, even though he had had a heart attack previously. Bert Edwin Peterson left this earth on November the 5th, 1957, just 4 months after I graduated from high school. And left my mother and I with a ranch, hired men who didn't like to work for women a lot of the times, approximately 2,500 head of sheep, a house. It was a tremendous amount, and I was my mother's support. And I don't think I did it very well, but I tried. Because I was all she had. A few lawyers that tried to get involved with a estate that, fortunately, there was a will. And if you get nothing else out of your grandma, know to have your legal package prepared, because you have no idea how your life will end. You don't want to know, you know?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I had to grow up in a hurry. I was no longer the little girl that was the pride and joy of a mom and a dad. It was not easy. I think that's why I felt so comfortable with Boyd, because he was humorous and fun to work with, and had a good family, and I met his family and sisters. But unfortunately, that marriage did not last. He made some other choices that were difficult for me, and it was hard for me to, what should I say, not feel like I was responsible for seeing the divorce come along. But out of that divorce, we had 2 super kids, one being your father. And I marvel at his ability and skills and his love for his family, and how he and Bert, the second son, named after my father, Bert Travis Dover, how they managed to turn out to be such honorable young men who have raised excellent families. So it was a time all piled in together with the dying of my father, my mother needing me, I kind of felt like I was treading water as fast as I could go. But I got through school quickly. It took me 3 years and a quarter. I didn't stay for 4 years. I was gone and teaching.
Right.
So, after the good fortune of having 2 children, Boyd and I had moved with the children to Tucson, Arizona. We had originally moved. My husband had a job with the Brown schools in Austin, Texas, for severely emotionally disturbed kids. Tough, really tough kids. And we loved it in Austin. Had built our first home in Austin, and it had planned to stay until we got a phone call from a gentleman that he had met at a conference regarding emotionally disturbed kids and social work services, because he had gotten his degree in social work. And just to see the difficult times, you learn from them. You hope you learn from them. But after several years, I was introduced to another man by the name of Earl Richard Lubbers. And I remember, I'll tell you this funny story because it tells you something about your dad. He would call me. Mr. Lubbers would call me occasionally, but the divorce was not final, and it went on and went on and went on. And finally, Mr. Lubbers called and said, "Hey, I see you made the newspaper." And in Tucson, they used to print divorce decrees, bankruptcies, all kinds of legal documents, which now would never happen because of privacy. But Earl called and said, "Well, I won't bother you till, I just would like to get to know you." And I thought, oh, I've heard that one before. But finally, we did meet each other through my visiting teacher, and her husband was a friend that Earl had in Peru, who was a geologist. And Earl had been in Peru because his father was a mechanic who could work on huge equipment. And they were using this equipment in mining, for Utah Mining Construction, which is a very famous construction company. But the night Mr. Lubbers, Earl, came to meet me, or take me out to dinner, or something, I can't even remember now at that point, he rang the doorbell, and the front door had a screen on it, and you'd open the door, and here was the wrought iron and the screen. And Brent ran down the hall of the house, opened the door, and said, "Are you going to marry our mom?" Oh my!
Day one.
And Earl responded by saying, "Gee, fella," he didn't even know who they were, really. "Gee, fella, I don't know. I'll have to see if she asks me." Well, as the story goes, it goes from one thing to another, and I was terrified of getting married again. And so was he, because he was a bachelor. And I had these 2 little guys that turned out to be the joy of my life, and their children. So, anyway, that's about it, I think, really. I taught school for all those years, and
Right.
I had the good fortune to travel quite a bit. I guess the highlight, other than the Japanese experience, was going to China
Sure.
to teach there 2 different times. It was an opportunity through our church to go and to teach English, or to just be role models. We couldn't be missionaries. We weren't supposed to be, and we weren't.
Mm-hmm.
We were very involved with the students, and we still have contact with several of them, which you have met.
Yeah.
Lily, Polaris, and William. We consider them a very blessed part of our lives. We no longer have sheep in the back field here in Mount Pleasant, and I haven't ridden a horse in quite a few years, even though I did as a teenager, a young kid. But I feel like I've had a very good life. I had parents who loved me, and that's beyond saying what it's like to know that your parents love you. I'm sure you see that in your situation right now. I'm grateful that I taught school. I love teaching kids. It's not easy. Sometimes it looks easy, but it's a difficult profession. But
The most important,
yeah,
maybe.
Yeah. Say that again.
The most important profession,
Yeah.
probably, right? I mean,
Well, it's amazing how you have to look at it and say, I can endure this, and yet at the same time, I'm going to enjoy it, you know. And you want the children to enjoy it. You want them to have a love of reading, a love of learning.
right. It's very formative for them,
Yeah,
right?
very formative. Yeah. Anyway, we are here at this house on 4th of July. And if it could talk, it would tell you I was a pretty typical teenager. Thought I could do anything and couldn't, but thought I could. But a good life. Anyway, I'm very blessed and I feel fortunate, especially for the grandchildren, 11 grandchildren.
Yeah.
But it's not just having the grandchildren. It's seeing how the parents parent, how the kids respond, the opportunities you've been given. And that's true for Ryan and his family, and for Bert and his little family. They've had difficult times, but that's life. There are times you wonder, what did I do wrong? Or why didn't that work? But at the same time, I think I have no cause for complaint. As my father often said, thou shalt not complain. My mother was a strong woman, but she met her match when my father died and left us with hired man and sheep, and it's a different life. But I've always been glad I kept my ties with home.
Sure.
I have a lot of friends here, and anyway, as I face 78 years coming up, I can say, how lucky can I have been? Truly blessed.